Hey everybody, we are getting ready to do our first chapter of our book club. If you are just joining us, we are doing Picture Perfect Practice by Roberto Valenzuela. He is a Canon Explorer of Light, which is a pretty high honor, and I find his work to be very easy to understand, his teaching. So I've had this book forever, and I've never really gone through it just step by step. I read through it, I got some ideas, but I didn't actually put into practice what he said to do. So I thought this would be a great way to break it down chapter by chapter. We're just going to focus on the first. Um, it's 17 lessons. It's not exactly that many. I think it's 15 chapters, but I broke the last chapter into 3 weeks because it's three different things. Um, so we're going to break it down week by week, and I think this is really going to help us let it sink in. And so the first week is chapter 1, and that's geometry, and it's looking for geometry out in the world. And so he's got, the way I'm going to do it, he's got an assignment, and then I'll have an assignment. But his assignments are really important. So for instance, for the geometry assignment, you don't have to think about making it a masterpiece. All you're doing is you're looking in your environment, whether you're on your way to work, you're in your home, you're outside playing with your kids, your grandkids, whatever. Look for geometric shapes. So for instance, this morning I looked down at the tile on my floor. There was a bunch of rectangles. So I snapped a little picture. So what he wants you to do is start with, say, squares and find 5 to 10 squares. Take a quick snapshot of them and then move on to rectangles. What this is doing is it's training your eye to look for geometric shapes. And this is really going to help you when you're going out to take photos, to make more interesting compositions, add a little bit of difference into your photos. I would also encourage you, if you have any particular type of photography that you really like, go to the library or go to Barnes& Noble and look through some of the books. In fact, I have a bunch of photography books. I may look through later to see what some of the best photographers do in their work and how they incorporate some of the principles that he's talking about. Another thing I noticed is that you'll really start to notice things that overlap. So for instance, in the geometry section, I noticed a lot of my photos that could be used in the parallel lines chapter, or the silhouette chapter, or the reflection chapter. So a lot of these are going to overlap, they're going to layer, etc. So you're going to start to see as you go along, you're going to recognize more things, you can combine them, and then your photos are really going to go up a notch. So this book club will not focus on kind of the fundamentals of photography, getting things in focus, getting the color right, getting the exposure right. That really comes, those are really the camera basics and getting it off of auto. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I do have a class for that, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're just going to really focus on training your eye and helping your creativity, whether you're using your big girl camera or you're using your iPhone or you're using a little point and shoot or your GoPro. It really doesn't matter. You could even be using a drone. So it's just training your eye. And this is really for all levels. So if you've been shooting a long time, this is a great refresher. I know this is really going to help me refresh my memory on things I can be looking for when I'm composing shots. And then, if you're just starting out and you feel like, why don't my photos look like the photos I see, on the picture of the day on Google or whatever, this is going to start, you're going to start to notice like, hey, this is why their photos look like this and my photos look like this. And how can I start incorporating some of that into my work? So right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And what I've done is I've pulled several examples of geometry in some of my past work. This is from the last couple of years. And I was actually surprised. I do have quite a bit of geometry and quite a few examples to use here. So I was happy about that. I don't think that's going to be the case in every single week. I think some weeks I'm going to have to look harder than others. I know in week 2 we talk about balance. And as I looked through my photos, I thought, ooh, I need to work on that. In fact, I'll probably have more bad examples to show you in week 2 than I have good examples. So this is going to be a learning process for me as well, but I'm excited that there's so much excitement around this book club. And I hope that, the first chapter is, like 4 pages. So it's not a lot of reading. If you do the assignments, I think you'll really learn a lot. And then my assignment each week is just going to try to incorporate one of these principles into a photo. And again, it doesn't, I mean, you want to make it the best photo that you can, but don't feel like it has to be a work of art. Like we're just trying this out. We're starting it. And so as you go on throughout the year, you're going to see more and more. So don't put any stress on, oh my gosh, this picture has to be fantastic. In fact, if it's not fantastic, ask for feedback. And either me or the community, I'm sure, would be happy to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at my screen. Okay, let's walk through the chapter. The first thing that Roberto really talks about is just the types of geometry that you can look for. And the most common types are squares. He's got rectangles, circles, triangles, polygons, squares, arches, leading lines, parallel lines, and converging lines. So what I did is I went through some of my photos and I tried to find some examples of this for you to make it a little bit easier. And the interesting thing is there's very obvious geometric shapes, and then there's more implied geometric shapes. And the obvious ones are going to be really easy off the start, but it's the implied ones that I think will really take your work to the next level. And in the case of triangles, triangles are really important, especially if you're interested in family photography, because triangles are something when you put all your people together and you're building your family photo, you want to put them in little triangles. In fact, I should have pulled one of these, but maybe I'll post that in the Facebook community and I'll draw it out so you can see kind of a good composition of a family using triangles. So let's walk through this. Let's walk through some of my examples here, and I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. So the first thing that he talks about is geometry for framing. And framing, I think, is something that I do a lot, actually. So let's just buzz through a few of these that include framing examples. So here's a really obvious one. This is a Cirque du Soleil dancer, and he is framed by the circle. He's a little off balance, and you can see here, even there's a bit of a triangle. If I take from here to this light to here, we've got a non-obvious triangle, and then we've got this circle, and this sort of balances off him. Now, here's a less obvious circle. Here I was in Boston Garden, and we've got this swan here, and we've got a circle of ducks framing the swan. So this is something I look down. Now, of course, this little duck bugs me. I wish he wasn't here, but we've got this big swan here, and we've got a circle of ducks that is making the geometric shape around the swan, which I think makes the image more powerful. Here we've got Carolyn, who's part of this group. We were out shooting in Nashville, and she was taking a picture of something inside the store, but I saw her reflection here inside the shape. And here we've got some converging lines. So not only is this shape framing her, but it's also converging to the real her to bring some focus to her on this side of the frame as well. Now, let's see, here's some frames without people. I was shooting a corporate event, and you can see that we were at a distillery, and I used this window to frame all these barrels. So here we have circles and squares, plus we have the rectangles of the brick here. So we've got a lot of shapes. We've got squares, circles, we've got a large rectangle, and we have lots of little rectangles. So there's a lot going on in this photo, but I think the composition and all the shapes really makes it work. Here I was shooting senior pictures, and I was actually shooting a reflection, but you can see that I used the reflection to frame her face, which really draws attention to her face. It adds some interest to the photo as well. This is an interesting one. Could be a triangle or some converging lines. Framing my subject, so you see you've got the triangle here. Now what was interesting is, which do you like better? I kind of like him a little off center. So we've got this triangle framing him. Here he's more symmetrical, but here he's moved a little bit to the left. And we're going to learn more about this in our symmetry chapter, which is a few chapters from now. Let's see, we've got some, here's some more examples of framing. So here, same corporate event I was at before, but you can see this is a room photo, but rather than walking into the room and just taking kind of a plain shot, I took a picture through the windows, which adds a little bit more visual interest. Same with here, I was just walking down the street in Boulder, Colorado, and there was this really cute gelato shop, and kind of the combination of the square, the geometry, the reflection, um, I think makes this a pretty interesting picture. I'm a fan of reflections. Now, one thing I want to show you here, I'm going to go into actually showing you the crop. One thing that can really throw you off on geometry is having lines that aren't what the eye is used to. We're going to learn about this in parallel lines, but I'm going to show you this here as well. So I'm going to go and I'm going to go into this and I'm going to pull the crop out because I actually cropped this photo. Now, if I had cropped it crooked, right, your eye doesn't like that, okay? If your eye sees a square or a line that should be vertical, such as a horizon is a big one. I see people post like sunset pictures or horizon pictures all the time, and the horizon is crooked. That's one of like the surefire ways that you're just taking a snapshot. So make sure if your verticals should be vertical, if your horizontals should be level, make sure you do that. Take an extra minute just to straighten those up. You can do that on your iPhone. You can do that in Lightroom. You can do it in lots of editing programs. But the eye is used to seeing, you know, things that are straight up, straight up. So if it's off in a picture, you're going to be able to pick up on that. So that's just one thing to look out for. Now, he also talks about geometry for balance. And so balance, we're going to learn about balance actually in chapter 2, but really quickly what balance is you don't want your photo to be like side heavy. So all your subjects sort of bunched up in one side with no rhyme or reason to it. You want something on the other side. It could be negative space, but you want something on the other side to balance it out. You don't want it to feel heavy one way or the other. So one way that you can do that, I have a couple examples that I've pulled here. And the first one here is the lovely Sydney. You can see we've got her here, and we've got this big rectangle, Bama bound, so it's kind of weighted towards the left. But we offset that, but with these rectangles, the windows over here, we kind of add some weight to the right. So the photo feels very balanced. I had another example of this. Let me find it really quickly. Okay, I can't find it real quick, so that's all right. So let's go ahead. Oh, here it is. It's the first one I had. So let's go ahead and look at this photo. This was a photo I took at a corporate event, and you've got the large basketball on the right, you've got the small basketball on the left, plus the player. You can see that the player and the ball are really balanced by, the large ball is balanced by the player. It doesn't feel like it's tipping one way or the other. You've got a very heavy right side, but because you have the player, the ball, the lights, it feels very balanced. So let's go ahead and break this photo down. Actually, so you have a few things going on here. You have all the circles. You've got the circle lights. You've got the circle ball. You've got the ball here. You've got some rectangles. You've got the balance. So he's balancing the ball. And then you also have the repetition of the lights here. So there's a lot of different things that we're going to learn about throughout the book club that are going on in this particular picture. Now here's an example of very obvious shapes. So I was walking up the MARTA bus station and the light was coming in from upstairs and it was casting a very specific triangle shape. And so I just took a quick photo of that. I thought it looked cool. Now here's a less obvious example of some of the shapes that we have going on. First of all, you can see the planks in the deck are running in this direction, and the door, I'm shooting through the door, is exactly parallel to the planks. So we've got this line running through here creating two polygons, or if I extended it through the frame, it would be two triangles. So these two things are balancing each other. We have the line splitting down the middle that is parallel to the boards. And then if you look at the two kitties, they're actually two triangles and they're balancing each other. So this is one that's not as obvious, but once you break it down, you can see that the lines are adding visual interest to the picture, and then the two triangles are balancing each other, so that you have a very evenly weighted composition. Okay. So here's another one. Look at all these little triangles in the mountains, okay? Lots of different triangles here. And then I've kind of balanced the mountains with the large overcast skies above. So again, this doesn't feel super bottom heavy because I've got the sky balancing it out. Here is another non-obvious example of triangles, but if you break it down, you can see we've got our singer up here, and then if you draw a line from him down, and across, you've got a triangle. So you've got a really symmetrical triangle composition right here. And then you can take these lights too, and you can make a triangle here. You can make a triangle here. So there's, you can make triangles with the various lights. So there's a lot of different shapes going on here. And then again, we've got the bright part of the picture at the top balanced by the crowd lit up at the bottom. So this is something that's not super obvious, but when you really pay attention to it, you can see that those triangles are making a really interesting composition. Here's another example of my cat. Just the shadow is cutting from edge to edge, making two triangles. And his little head is in the dark part and his little body is in the light part. So this is a way that you can incorporate geometry even if you don't have any people in your subject. So I know that this book, and this came up in the comments, and I'm really glad it did, the book deals with portraits, so placing your subject within the geometric shapes. So if you don't have a subject, a human subject, that's okay. Use a pet. Use the landscape. There's several examples in here. I've used the swan. I've used, light poles. I've used palm trees, kitty cats, mountains. Just look for items in your environment that have a geometric shape that you can balance. It does not have to be human, okay? But this particular book is going to show where to place the human within that geometry. So when you do have a human, even if you don't always have a human, it will better help explain where to place that human so that you get the best composition. So even if you don't have someone to shoot, I feel like you can still really learn a lot from this book. So don't let that be off-putting. There's also a lot of wedding photography in here, and we're not going to talk about wedding photography at all. But there are some great examples that we can use and apply to anything. So I just wanted to make sure I said that because I don't want this book to feel like it excludes anyone. We talked about leading lines. So here's some converging lines with the fence. It's converging on our little adorable subject right here. She's sort of in the middle, and then we've got the lines converging right towards her. This is my daughter, and we've got the leading lines pointing right to her. And then if you look at them, so that's more of the obvious line. And then if we look at the non-obvious line, these live oaks are making an arch over her head. So it's really framing her with the arch and leading to her with the road. Now here I was out hiking in Arizona, and again we've got a triangle here. We've got a triangle here. And then we could even draw a triangle. We could draw a rectangle here, here, here. Triangle here. So there's lots of different ways to look at this, to look at the good composition. Now let's go ahead and look at arches. Oh, here's another one, another concert example. So here's the geometric shape, and we've placed the subject a little bit off center. I think it would have looked weird if he was right in the middle with his head on top of him. So what I did was, instead of standing to the right and shooting this way, I just moved to the left and shot straight on and used the square in the frame to kind of be a symmetrical, that kind of cuts the frame in half, and then placed him to the right so that you get a more interesting composition that way. Now, another thing you can do, I was walking in the streets of, I think this is Prague. So we're just walking down the street. There's tons of tourists, tons, okay? So you can't get around it. They're everywhere, right? You've got all these beautiful buildings. So how do you make a typical tourist picture look more interesting? And I like the way Roberto says it in the book. He says, what's the tourist shot and then what's the photographer shot? So he uses the Louvre in Paris as an example, and he says, there's a million people around the Louvre. So the tourist shot is him standing in front of the Louvre, all the tourists all around. The photographer shot is he goes in and he just captures the triangle of the top of the Louvre. And that it's more artistic, it has lots of angles, it's isolated, it's minimalist, and so it's the same place, standing in the same spot, but it's a totally different picture. So I kind of feel like this is a little bit like that. Instead of just taking a picture of the building and showing all the people, I used the arch to sort of frame the street and show the people at the bottom, but it's a little bit more interesting than just taking a picture of the street. Like, I took the composition into consideration when taking and cropping this photo afterwards. Again, we like to go shooting as a family after Thanksgiving. So just looking, this is a great example of, it can be the same shot over and over and over again. My brother's taking a shot. So how do you make it different and interesting? So, you can zoom in and get the smoke. You can zoom in, get a tight shot. But other ways is you can use wherever you are to frame your subject. So you can see I've used the triangle here. I've got my brother, right in the middle pretty much. He's a little bit off center, but just use the environment to frame my subject. And he talks about this, using the environment to frame your subject. So he uses some examples of some windows in a hotel. So go ahead and just read through. I'm trying to see if there's any examples that I missed. Here's another one from a corporate event where I used the arch of the doorway to show what was going on inside as a little bit different way than just walking inside and showing what everybody was doing. A little bit more interesting. You can see it's very balanced. This is very symmetrical. We've got, 2 lights on either side. We've got this little wagon in the middle. We can see that there's a concert going on. We've got rows of lights converging to the stage that kind of draws your eye into the action. So again, it's simple stuff. It's not hard. It's just learning to see it. And that's what this is all about, is just learning to see it. So even like here we were in Prague again, and I saw this star, and so just framing this person inside the star. So being aware, this person could have been over here and kind of blended in, but being aware that you want them in the middle. And then here you can see lots of squares with the chain link fence, and you can see I've got my nephew's eye within this square, right? So his face is framed with this square. We've got the guy in the outfield, his head is also framed by the square. And we've got this guy over here who is also framed by this square. And if you look at it, here's another non-obvious triangle. So if I made a line from my nephew's head to the outfielder to the first baseman, that is a triangle, okay? So that's another way, and it's not perfectly symmetrical, but that composition is making a triangle, and that triangle makes it balanced. It makes it more interesting. So start to look for triangles. Triangles are they can be really cool in your photography. So look for that as well. Here was an example of just looking for a non-obvious rectangle. So this little tray here makes a little rectangle. We've got the line of purple and the line of yellow making 2 parallel lines. Here's another example of framing. I just went outside of the shop where she was shopping, and I shot through the window, but I also used the environment to frame her. And one thing now, if you don't know your camera basics, you don't know aperture, shutter speed, this may not make sense. But if you use a really shallow aperture, see how it blurred out these lines? So it's not distracting away from her because you don't really know what that is. It's actually out of focus. It's just a frame. And then nothing in the background is distracting away from her either, because I'm using a really shallow depth of field. I'm shooting at 2.8 and I'm shooting through the window. So she's completely in focus. The frame is out of focus. The background is out of focus. And it's really zeroing in on her and her alone. And then the color on her turban makes it really pop. So those are just another method that you can use. Here's a natural frame. So we were sitting out on the deck out at a photography workshop, and we were just chit-chatting, and the sun was starting to set, and it was coming in very harsh, but it created this rectangle shadow. So that, depending on the time of the day, this shadow isn't always there, but it was right there. It was illuminating her face. And so you can see I've got a rectangle here. I've got, what's it called? A parallelogram? I don't know. We've got the horizontal lines here. So again, it's really important to keep these horizontal lines straight because the eye wants to see them level. You don't want to see this line crooked or this line crooked. This line is okay. This line can be any old way because your eye knows that it's at an angle, but your eye knows that these are vertical and these are horizontal. So keep an eye on keeping those straight. And we're going to talk more about that in another chapter. So here we've just used the shadow in the environment to frame her naturally. So that is a quick overview of Chapter 1, Geometry. Now I've got the book here. If you don't have the book, I've got the assignment in the Facebook group. And if you're not in the Facebook group, you can request to join the Big Girls School community on Facebook. That's what it's called. It's got the same logo as the Instagram, my Instagram logo, so you should know what you're talking about. You'll just request to join, and then I will let you in. And I've got a brief explanation, this video, and then I've also summarized Roberto's assignment, and then I've put my assignment in there as well, which is just to incorporate one of these shapes into your photo this week and either share it on Instagram and hashtag the Big Girl School. We want to feature some of your photos, or share it in the Facebook group under this week's lesson, and just so we can all comment and see, because I think there's a lot of inspiration in seeing what other people come up with, because we don't always think of the things that other people see. So it's going to be really inspiring to see what everybody's doing. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'm excited to get this going, and good luck this week finding geometric shapes.